Today is the last day of 2020, and I want to take the opportunity to reflect on as much of the entire year as I possibly could, to see as many connections from one thing to the other, to see where these crazy, winding, wild paths of 2020 have led us. One of the benefits of writing a weekly newsletter is it makes it easy. I can just go through the archive and look at every email that I've sent out and see where are those connections that emerged that I wasn't even seeing at the moment that I sent it out. So the first is obviously COVID. Like so many of you, I have nervous, what are they called, panic attacks all the time in COVID. That stuff tends to get glossed over, but I would be silly not to mention that. It's on everybody's minds. The vaccine's coming out. But coming back to March, I think it was, when I was first wearing that mask indoors, boy, that's when things really started to head in a very different direction than they had been just a month before. And that kicked off one of my favorite stories from 2020, which was COVID Accelerator. This is something that I talked about at the time, and I said, this seems like it's a side quest. It's this total, it's this other thing that's not carbon, it's not climate. I'm going to go for it. 8 months later, we launched something called the Air Miners Accelerator, which is totally different in some ways, but you can definitely see the connections back to really building a community really quickly, innovating really quickly, creating new ideas, and pushing people to take those things to the next step. So I'm really thrilled looking back at COVID Accelerator and seeing it as, yes, it was this sidestep, but the more I look back at 2020 or look back at previous years, I just see there's not really a reverse. It's basically we're always driving forward. Sometimes we're driving forward over there and over there, but we don't really go down somewhere and then have to pull back and get back on track. Really, you really are always, at least I am, always going forward, even if at times it looks like you're going to the left or the right. Ultimately, it's always forward. And that's the nature of 2020, is through all these ups and downs with COVID, with fires in California, it has always been forward. And one of the biggest things that I can point to with COVID Accelerator is obviously the Air Miners Accelerator, but another point is Stanley Robinson speaking at the Air Miners Conference. So as you know, the Air Miners Conference emerged from this need to get the carbon community together, and also a deep frustration at the cancellation or the delay of the Conference of Parties annual conference. So the COP meeting was moved back, and we decided to step in with Air Miners into that void that was left. So I mentioned there was a connection from COVID Accelerator to Stanley Robinson speaking at the Air Miners Conference. So Stanley Robinson obviously is sci-fi legend and one of the first people to use the term air miners in his 1990s book, Red Mars. So the connection between COVID Accelerator and KSR speaking at Air Miners comes from a new friend from COVID Accelerator. Sci-fi legend David Brin, who's the author of The Postman, was interested in creating an X Prize focused on COVID solutions. And so Ari and I connected with David. We got to pitch the X Prize on creating a prize specifically for COVID solutions. We were looking at ventilators at the time. We wanted to create this kind of grand challenge for ventilators. But coming out of that, with the Air Miners Conference coming up a few months later, I wrote David and I said, hey, do you know Stanley Robinson? Because he's talking about air miners already. And David made an incredible introduction, and that resulted in Stanley Robinson talking about the carbon trifecta at the Air Miners Conference. And he just published a new article in Bloomberg coming out of the Air Miners Conference. He got connected to Klaus Lackner, and he's got a new article that's talking about understanding direct air capture and his chat with Klaus. So that is super cool, right? So this side quest on COVID turns into meeting sci-fi legend David Brin, working with him on pitching a new big idea. That connection, that work together, turns into Stanley Robinson speaking at Air Miners, and Stanley Robinson speaking at Air Miners turns into this article in Bloomberg about direct air capture and pulling carbon from the air. That is the nature of 2020, and that's why I love doing these year-end reviews, because you can see these things that start out looking like just nodes or just a single point, and you start to see the things that they connect to and create this whole thread. So thanks for the opportunity to review that. One of my favorite posts from 2020 was riding the wave. And so it's this whole thought on this is what it looks like to be in the water. It looks like you're splashing around. It looks like you're sinking or flailing or slipping, or like on the back of the board and you go whoop and you plop off into the water. That's what it looks like to be on the water and not on the beach. So I encourage you all to ride the wave, whatever that means for you. Maybe it's carbon, maybe it's climate, maybe it's something else that you're working on. One other thing that's really come together this year is creating an on-ramp for new people to join the carbon removal industry. For me, that started way back when we started publishing the Air Mining 101 guide. And it started out as it was a Google Doc that Devoit Mausner put together. Basically all these resources for people to read if they're interested in some aspect of carbon removal. This year that got polished up and kind of represented on the Coda platform. And to date, over 2,500 people have read that Air Mining 101 guide. Of course, John Sanchez has launched the Carbon Removal Academy, which is where people are able to meet others that are reading the same materials, learning about carbon removal, and exploring it together. And there's some exciting new stuff coming up at the beginning of 2021 related to that. Also, PBS putting out a show that's got highlights of people working in carbon removal, including Apoorv from Carbon Upcycling Technologies and Marcus from the X Prize. Really powerful to see this door opening and new people stepping through it. We're going to see a lot more of that in 2021. 2021. Wow, that sounds like kind of futuristic. Also seeing so many more entrepreneurs stepping into the space. The day before the United States election, we launched the Air Miners Accelerator, but it also grew from some lines that were being drawn much earlier in 2020. I remember writing the newsletter for fundraising tips for startups in carbon removal, and it was right around that time that I connected with the Altman brothers who were doing their Apollo projects. So they were looking to invest millions of dollars into deep tech companies, and specifically they were looking into how to invest a few $1,000,000 into carbon removal companies. I got to work with them to review the companies and just see so much great stuff from early stage entrepreneurs working on carbon removal. And those lessons gave me a lot of momentum when we were putting together the Air Miners Accelerator. And so the award for the longest thread of 2020, I've got this award stuff on my brain because of the Carbies, which went incredibly well. That's kind of the beginning of a thread, I think. But the longest thread of 2020 was the Direct Air Capture Summit. And so this, if you look back, there was a day where I got to meet Peter Eisenberger for the first time and had this incredible conversation about the potential and the need to mobilize more people working on carbon removal and direct air capture more specifically. And that, I remember I was in Hawaii, it was the very beginning of the year, maybe the first week of January. And we worked throughout the year. The goal was to create a meeting of the minds on direct air capture and to help mobilize more people to get into the industry. I got to work with Peter Eisenberger and the rest of the team, Nicholas, Nadia, Patrick, Raymond, on how do we mobilize this industry? How do we help kick off the changes and the growth and scale that we so need? And then in the summer, we actually hosted that Direct Air Capture Summit, which kicked off so many conversations and even a report that I'm going to link here. And I'm guessing that report is somewhere on Joe Biden's desk. Maybe it's covered up in a bunch of other papers and stuff, but I think it's somewhere around Joe Biden's desk, I can tell. And it was such a pleasure to work with the whole team there to bring together this meeting of the minds on direct air capture. What's my big takeaway from 2020? It's around booting up other people. It's around helping entrepreneurs start companies through the Air Miners Accelerator. It's about helping other people create their own newsletters so they can share their ideas and their thinking. It's about connecting women air miners and connecting people to ask questions to luminaries like Bill Gross in the field. And it's about booting up tons of new people to work on pulling carbon from the air. So that's 2020, the last moments of 2020. This is going out. See you in 2021.